March 23rd, 2013 started out like any other day. It was a Saturday, and my husband Glenn and I were woken up early by our puppy Hannah with loving kisses. She wouldn't let us sleep in, so we got up and went out to get coffee like we'd done so many Saturdays before that, and then went to look at a car that Glenn wanted to buy. We stopped on the way home to pick up his 18-year-old son, who was spending the weekend with us. Glenn was in a real rush that day to get home. All he wanted to do was to be with me, his son, and enjoy the weekend together. He'd just come off 2 intense weeks where he'd been working 2 jobs to earn enough money to replace his truck because the transmission had blown out. If something could go wrong that day or in those 2 weeks, it did. Poor Glenn, even his rental car broke down for him a few days before. But he took it in stride. He always did. That was Glenn. So I dropped Glenn and his son off at home and left to get some groceries. I wanted to make a special dinner to celebrate his hard work and his accomplishments. While I was away, Glenn suffered a massive brain hemorrhage. We never spoke again. I'll never forget the day we met. It was July of 1999 at the coffee warehouse in Venice. I had just come back from Europe where my friend Bonnie encouraged me to make a list of eligible men. I was 38 years old and hadn't had a serious boyfriend in almost 10 years. If you have a list, she said, then when a guy on the list asks you out, you'll know it was meant to be. I thought about it for a second, no harm, and jotted down a few names on the list, but no one special. But then, I thought of this guy back home who had been staring at me for almost 3 years at the coffee warehouse in Venice. He's always seemed to be there, and he was always smiling. We'd been watching each other's moves for so long that it felt like we knew each other, but we didn't. This went back to 1997, maybe 96. My then teenage son Desi worked there when he was in high school. I remember seeing him chat up my son often. He was even trying to meet me back then. He was strikingly handsome and looked like a combo of Richard Gere, George Clooney, and Viggo Mortensen. He had green eyes, salt and pepper hair, and always had a surfboard in the back of his truck. So without knowing a name, I wrote down Gray Surfer and added him to the list. Once back home, I stopped at the coffee warehouse, and there he was again, the mystery surfer man. But this time, he asked me out. He just blurted it out. "Hi, my name is Glenn. How was your trip to Europe? Let's go do something." I was so stunned that I immediately said yes, and we went out on our first date a few days later. That was how we began, and we spoke to each other or saw each other every day after that for the rest of his life. I never met anybody like Glenn before. He loved me from the start and wasn't afraid to show his vulnerable side. And even though he had just gone through a bitter divorce and custody battle, he was still willing to give love a chance. If he said he'd call at 9, he'd call at 8:55. If he was going to pick me up at 6, he'd pull up at 5:45. I liked that about him. He was a man of his word. He was also a hopeless romantic. He used to draw hearts on the bathroom mirror with my nail polish and leave love notes on my pillow. Not a day would go by without Glenn telling me how much he loved and adored me. He was the best cheerleader a girl could ever have. Glenn T Greenberg was the love of my life. When I arrived home on that fateful Saturday, Glenn was clearly in trouble. He tried to tell me something, and it came out all gobbledygook. And then he lost consciousness. He was rushed to UCLA, where I was told immediately, he's got a brain bleed, the doctor said. as bad as they come. We'll try and operate, but he's already in a coma. You better say your goodbyes. Glenn survived the brain surgery, but after sitting vigil in 4 days in the ICU, more bad news. The hemorrhage had caused 80 to 90% damage in his brainstem. The brainstem controls your primal bodily function, like breathing. There was no coming back from this. I called his family in New York, gave them the grave news. I would keep him on life support long enough for them to come out and say goodbye, and then we would let him go. You know, most couples just hum along. That wasn't Glenn and I. Every day for us was excitement and adventure. We spent 14 magical years together. The day before Glenn collapsed, he called me at work to tell me the best part of his day was coming home and cuddling each night. So, just after 2 a.m. on March 28, 2013, I crawled up on Glenn's hospital bed to snuggle for the last time. And then he took his last breath. Picture your perfect life, the life you've always wanted. You work hard to get it, and it's yours. Then one day, for no reason, you have to walk out the front door without saying goodbye and never look back. That's what I've had to do. Start a brand new life when all I've wanted was the one that I had with Glenn. But that life is gone forever. That's sudden death. And now, it's been 2 years. I know that I must create a new life for myself. I'm working on that. I'm moving forward the best way that I know how. Right after Glenn died, I thought something wonderful would happen, you know, to balance out all the bad. But I soon realized that life just doesn't work that way. Instead, it just keeps moving forward. I've met some wonderful people. Some of them are here today. I've learned a lot about myself too. I'm resilient. I'm a survivor. And as silly as it sounds, the old cliches have worked for me. 1 foot in front of the other. Be here now. Just breathe. My perspective has also changed. Things that used to bother me now easily just roll right off my back. Life is slower. I'm a different person now. I have to be in order to move forward and find meaning where there is none. And I appreciate the little things now. A flower that grows out of the crack of a sidewalk, a bird in flight, my dog Hannah curling up and resting beside me. These things help me feel safe and watched over. I can always count on them. Shortly after Glenn died, I met a man at a support group who had lost his wife recently. They were driving to a Dodger game in separate cars because they had just come from work. Well, he accidentally rear-ended her on the 101 freeway, pushing her car into an adjacent lane where a semi-truck immediately plowed her over, killing her instantly. The age-old phrase, "it could be worse," really rings true. In 1811, the principal chief of the Sioux Indians died. So Chief Big Elk went to speak to the Sioux people who were overcome with grief. "Do not grieve," he said. "Misfortunes will happen to the wisest and the best of men. Death will come, always out of season." Big Elk was right. Glenn wasn't singled out, nor was he the only one where tragedy came calling. And I'm not a victim. Glenn lived a purposeful life, and he made a positive impact. His legacy lives on. Glenn was an organ donor, and he helped 89 people, ages 19 to 92. And I couldn't be prouder. I've become an ambassador with One Legacy, which is the Southern California Foundation for Organ Donation. I speak at public events and help bring about awareness of the importance to be an organ donor. And it's a chance for me to sing Glenn's praises. What was to be the last chapter of his life now has an addendum, and he lives on through others. This is a big week for me. Tomorrow is the second anniversary of the day he collapsed, March 23rd, and Saturday is the date of his passing. But I'm also speaking at 2 public events this week and city council meetings where I'll get to talk about Glenn and his donations. I will be bringing Glenn with me this week and for the rest of my life in my heart. Thank you.